Shocking remarks about the Charlottesville, Virginia violence. Sources tell CNN that the president is, quote, without regret. We're back with Democratic Congressman Andre Carson of Indiana. He's a member of the House Intelligence Committee. Congressman, I want to share with you and our viewers a note I received last night from the former CIA Director John Brennan right after our show. And let me put the words up on the screen. Wolf, just watched your interview with Senator Blumenthal when you mentioned that you lost all 4 of your grandparents to the unspeakable evil of Nazism. I just want to extend my sympathies not only for their deaths, but also to you and your family and countless others for the pain inflicted today by the despicable words of Donald Trump. Mr. Trump's words and the beliefs they reflect are a national disgrace, and all Americans of conscience need to repudiate his ugly and dangerous comments. If allowed to continue along this senseless path, Mr. Trump will do lasting harm to American society and to our standing in the world. By his words and his actions, Mr. Trump is putting our national security and our collective futures at grave risk. Signed, John Brennan. Very, very powerful words. As a member of the Intelligence Committee, do you agree that the national security of the United States is now at risk?
I think in many ways, yes. I mean, considering the fact that some of his strongest supporters are anti-Semitic, and you know what your family has had to endure. And I think globally speaking, I think that he has promoted himself to be a decisive leader. He promoted himself to be a bold leader, but it's clear that he is riddled with indecision, and his impulsivity, as I've said before, has in a way crippled his ability to garner the kind of support to boost morale in the administration. I mean, I talk to folks in the State Department quite often, talk about how the internal controls really aren't there and how morale is low and how they're understaffed and they're not getting the kind of support that's so necessary from the top. And so I think of it as it relates to intel, he has been too cozy to Vladimir Putin. I think that coziness has caused unease with the global community, many of our Five Eyes partners, and I think that his way of lashing out, not being diplomatic, he thinks he's being bold, he loves being provocative, but that kind of provocation has limits, Wolf, and I think Director Brennan, he's right. He's a veteran. He's skilled. I have great respect for him. I've worked with him. He sits on a panel. He has sat on a panel with me and Congressman Terry Sewell of Alabama in terms of recruiting more minorities in the IC space. And I think his instincts are right.
Are you surprised that a career intelligence professional like John Brennan would feel the need to weigh in on this specific issue in those very strong words at this point?
You know, Director Brennan is a man of very few words. He's very wise. But I think for someone like him to come out and show support you and your family and empathize, but also to make that kind of statement, it shows that he and others are concerned about the preservation of our democracy.
What can you and other lawmakers, congressmen, do to counteract this potential threat?
I think that you know, the blessing is that you have committees like the Armed Services Committee, Transportation and Infrastructure, and of course Intelligence. There are others who are probably some of the most bipartisan committees on the Hill. And the beauty lies in our ability to reach across the aisle and agree on national security issues, agree on infrastructure issues. These are universal issues. These are issues that Democrats and Republicans generally agree on. I think the blessing is that we have a separate but equal branch of government where we can put aside our differences, put aside this petty dialogue about dismantling the Affordable Care Act, and get to the real work of job creation and protecting Americans.
Congressman Andre Carson, thanks so much for joining us.
Always a pleasure. Thank you, Wolf.
Thank you. And this important note to our viewers, we did reach out to Republican leaders throughout the day. They all, at least for now, they refused to join us, but the invitation is clearly still very much open. We have much more coming up on the breaking news.
Now says the August Obamacare subsidy payments to insurance companies will indeed be made. We've just gotten that in. Let's go to our senior congressional correspondent, Maddow in Washington with more. Maddow, what's the deal?
Yeah, that's right. In fact, the White House had been threatening that they would not actually make these payments to insurers in order to defray those costs that the insurers incur and to subsidize health coverage. Now, what the Trump administration is saying is that they will move forward with their August payments. Now, the one reason why, Brooke, they're moving forward in this is because of a new analysis from the Congressional Budget Office suggesting that ending these payments would dramatically lead to an increase in premiums, up to 20% increase in premiums. Now, also, at the same time, doing so could potentially increase the budget deficit, and as well as that it could lead to fewer people having coverage. Now, the reason why the White House had been threatening not moving forward with these payments is because we've heard President Trump say time and again that he wants Obamacare to collapse. And one way to do that is to not allow these payments to go forward. But by not allowing these payments to go forward, it could really upend the individual insurance market and create chaos in the system. So right now, the White House is saying they will move forward. It will still add pressure, Brooke, on both Republicans and Democrats in the Senate to come up with a deal as soon as next month and try to fix this ongoing problem. To see if they can at least not repeal Obamacare, but fix some elements in the individual insurance market. But right now, the White House is at least saying they're moving forward with these payments in order to prevent any further turmoil that we've seen from insurers pulling out in various states here.
Manu, thank you. Manu Raju in Washington. Let's go back, though, to the story that is Charlottesville, Virginia. I've got two CNN political analysts, Carl Bernstein, Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist and author, and Joshua Green, author of Devil's Bargain. Guys, good to see you both. Carl Bernstein, to you, you say the president is in free fall. How do you mean?
Well, he may be in free fall, and the question is whether he has any parachutes left, and if he does, can he land anywhere soft enough beyond his base? Because right now the issue is before the country, as it never has been, in the Congress, especially among Republicans, in the military, in the intelligence community, where large numbers of leaders believe he is not fit to be the president of the United States. And this is happening at the same time that he's under investigation by a special prosecutor who's closing in on him and his family. So it's a dangerous moment in American history. I've never seen such a moment, really, of peril in terms of the presidency, including in Watergate. We don't know how Trump reacts to things, not well and not usually with an idea of what's good for the whole country. And what we're seeing for the first time is that members of Congress who are Republicans are saying to each other, he is unfit and we have to do something about it. But will they become public?
They're saying it to each other.
Yeah, but
it's the Senate Majority Leader, Mitch McConnell, told Manu, or actually didn't tell Manu, a source told Manu that Mitch McConnell is privately upset over how the president's handling this.
It's more than upset. It's more than upset.
But he's private about it.
Yeah, but
should he do more?
Look, I can't tell those guys what to do.
I know you
and
can't,
at the same time, they know that they're on shaky moral ground with this president, and they're abandoning him. The question is, how are they going to abandon him? They understand that the constituencies that they need, beyond Donald Trump's base, are coming together in a consensus that this president is not fit to be the president of the United States, not ethically, not morally, and not in terms of being able to lead the country in a way that unites it and defends the Constitution, the people, and the defense of the United States itself. This is a crisis, and it's being recognized, and the military leaders particularly are aware of this. They're talking to each other about it. There's not going to be a coup, but the idea, and let's say that very strongly, nobody's going to have a coup. This is not about a deep state. This is about a consensus developing that the president of the United States is unfit. We've never been here. It's different than Nixon, and it's dangerous.
Josh Green, what about his inner circle? You know, these are neo-Nazis that we're talking about, and we know that Gary Cohn and Steve Mnuchin are both Jewish. Stood behind him yesterday. Gary Cohn, latest CNN reporting is that he is enraged and has been embarrassed. This has been devastating. Does he resign? Should he resign?
Well, that's a decision that he has to make. And until these kinds of things are said publicly, until these senior officials come out and say this or resign on principle, which people have done in the past, which people did during Watergate, I don't think it really counts. I mean, you know, leaking to reporters that you're unhappy is a pretty gutless way of expressing your opinion on something as serious as this. I think the decision that people like that have to make is, at what point does this become untenable? At what point is my own reputation so tarnished by my association with Trump and what he's saying that I feel that I need to leave?
Talking to Doug High a second ago, proud Republican, who was basically saying, I don't know if I want Gary Cohn to the world to resign, because who does that then leave us with in the White House? I mean, we don't know who the president would replace these people with.
Look, the real thing is Donald Trump is president of the United States. He's been governing the country, and he's been governing the White House in his own image and the way he wants to. And it doesn't much matter who's there. He's not capable of being restrained, as we can see. Yeah. He's not capable of taking constructive advice. And he is who he is and always has been. I think that's one of the things that's evolving in this consensus, that he was perhaps able, through some very smart campaigning and recognizing some things about the conditions of our country that Hillary Clinton did not. He is the legitimate president of the United States, but that does not protect him when he says things like he has now said to reveal who he really is. And now those who have backed him, who are not his base, have to do something about it. And I think they're coming to a realization of that. Remember, and this is different than Watergate. In Watergate, we had a criminal president of the United States. This goes beyond criminality. What is evolving in the consensus is a view that the president is not competent, that he's not ethical, that he is not capable of being the president. This is a very different, dangerous situation. And believe me, this discussion that we're talking about is taking place. How rapidly it will evolve in terms of people publicly stating the things they're saying to us. And this is a real challenge for journalists, because we in the journalistic community ought to be going to the military leaders, to the congressional Republicans, to the business leaders, and saying, on background, they're not going to say it for the record. Try to get them to say it for the record. Look, I could be wrong. Maybe it's not as pervasive as my reporting would indicate, but I trust my reporting. And I think what we need to be doing as reporters is asking the people we cover, what is going on here? What are you prepared to do? What do you think is happening? Is this man fit to be the president of the United States? As you are saying in private, he's not.
I know. You want to jump in.
Two other points here, though. One is the business community, interestingly, did stand up and publicly rebuke the president and take steps that people like Gary Cohn and Steven Mnuchin have so far not seen fit to do. I think that's important for two reasons. One, just as a statement of principle, but two, Trump's appeal, Trump's political appeal beyond just his base of hardcore nationalists, was to independents and even to Democrats who believe this is a business guy who can run the government, who can create jobs. The symbolism of these two councils disbanding in disgust at Trump's failure to call out white supremacy, I think is a potentially mortal blow to this image of Trump as a business guy who can run the country in a way that politicians cannot.
I think the fact that we're using the word mortality is really interesting.
I have 30 seconds left, and let me just ask you, Josh, on Jared and Ivanka. This is, again, we talk about palace intrigue, again, another massive blow-up where they're MIA.
Amazingly, they're on vacation.
They're on vacation.
You can go back and look at a couple critical points. One that I covered in the book was when Paul Manafort blew up. They were actually yachting David Geffen in Croatia at the time. So they often seem to be missing and on vacation during these critical moments. And you wonder if they were here and present and able to exert a little bit of their influence if things might not have gotten quite as out of control as they did yesterday.
The line from the CNN reporting, Ivanka Trump and Jared Kushner vacationing in Vermont have communicated with the president, period. We got to go. Josh Green, Carl Bernstein, thank you both so much. Coming up next, you talked about the business advisory councils there. President Trump disbanding both of his business advisory councils today. Jake Tapper is standing by. He's going to take over for us from Washington momentarily. Stay with CNN. While many Republicans have spoken to condemn Nazis and white supremacists, very few have actually taken it a step further and called out President Trump by name. Florida Senator Marco Rubio is one of the few tweeting out, Mr. President, you can't allow white supremacists to share only part of the blame. He then went on to quote scripture, posting this passage from Proverbs, tweeting, the violent deceive their neighbors and feed them into a way that is not good. With me now, Pastor Joshua Dubois, former religious affairs director in the Obama White House. Sir, it is always nice to have you on. How are you,
Great
Joshua?
to be with you, Brooke. Thanks for having me.
So I realize you probably don't have President Obama on speed dial. That said, where do you think, just knowing him, where do you think his head is, or the former First Lady, in all of this?
Yeah, listen, I can't speak for the former president or former First Lady Michelle Obama, but I can say that they have showed us an example of what moral leadership looks like. After the massacre at Mother Emanuel in Charleston, President Obama could have shied away. He could have avoided the big issues of race and hate and American history that were provoked. But instead, he went down to Charleston. And, I was there in the audience sitting behind the families as he gave that speech about American history and amazing grace, standing just a few feet above the coffin of Reverend Clemente Pinckney. This is a president, our former president, who has led in a moral way and engaged the tough moral issues of this time. But unfortunately, in the memorial service that we had just recently after Charleston, President Trump wasn't there. And the reason he wasn't there was because he did not lead in a moral way. He did not draw clear moral lines. And I think that's a shame.
I just want to share with everyone on President Obama. He hasn't said anything today specifically. We know Bush 41 and 43 have, but he did tweet this whole massive Nelson Mandela quote. We can throw it up on the screen. Just you can see, everyone can see just a piece of it. This is apparently now the #1 liked tweet ever. That said, Joshua, wow. Just last month, a picture circulated on Twitter of faith leaders laying hands on the president in prayer with the caption, "Such an honor to pray within the Oval Office for the President of the United States and Vice President." My question is, you have these evangelical leaders in the country who have these, very important voices who have supported, endorsed the president. What do they say to him now?
Well, we need them to show moral courage. And, it's a shame when the president's, now former manufacturing and business advisors are showing more morality and moral courage than the president's faith advisors. We did see some of them write a letter, speaking against racism and white supremacy, but have they directly confronted this president and made it clear that his actions, his normalization of Nazism and white supremacy are wrong? I have not seen them do that. And so at minimum, they should catch up to the manufacturing advisors, but we really need them to speak with a clear voice and make it clear that, particularly in an evangelical community that sanctions slavery and Jim Crow and so forth, that this is a new day in American evangelicalism. That hasn't happened yet. And Brooke,
lastly,
in general,
Joshua, you are a father?
Yes, that's right.
I don't know how old they are, but
I have my son will turn 2 next week, actually, so we're in party planning mode right now.
Okay, well, never mind then. It's not like you would have had a conversation with a 2-year-old over what's happening. I just keep thinking about parents in this country and the conversations they're having with their little ones, but we'll save that conversation for when he or she gets a little bit bigger. Joshua Dubois, always a pleasure.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Thank you. Thank you. Coming up next, Baltimore becomes the latest city to take down Confederate statues in the wake of the deadly Charlottesville rally. Just into CNN, President Trump is moving forward, quote, without regret, after his extraordinary news conference in the lobby of Trump Tower. CNN's Sarah Morey joins us with some new details, including strong reaction from the president's top economic advisor, Gary Cohn. Sarah, what have you learned?
Well, Brooke, obviously the president has been facing backlash from members of his own party, from former presidents, from Wall Street executives who are fleeing his company. But he is moving forward without regret. Sources are telling my colleague Jeff Zeleny that the president does not regret at all the comments that he made, that he frankly feels defiant in the face of all of this criticism. Now, he really is looking at the reactions playing out and basically sees it as hyperventilating from a bunch of East Coast liberals and the media, who the president has made very clear he basically views as his opposition. And this is kind of the mindset that he was in throughout the presidential campaign, certainly at the end when he was under fire, when the polls showed him behind, and he went on, of course, to win the presidency. That is kind of where his mind is at. But, of course, there are tensions amid the people who have to work for him. Not all staffers are of the same mindset of the president. And one person who is certainly not of that mindset is Gary Cohn, the president's top economic advisor. We're told that he was enraged to be by the president's side as he was making those comments at Trump Tower yesterday. Remember, this was supposed to be an infrastructure event. That's what went off the rails. And since then, he's just been embarrassed. He's been disappointed. One of his associates said it wouldn't be a surprise if he does contemplate quitting. But of course, Cohn has had his eye on jobs bigger than the one he has now, possibly being the next Fed chair. These are the things that people are weighing as they're deciding, look, should I jump ship in the administration or can I hold out? Is there still more work for me to do here? Is it worth it?
Sarah, thank you. Let's discuss a little bit more. Democratic Congressman Hakeem Jeffries here of New York, who is calling for 2 streets named after Confederate generals to be renamed, is behind the bill to remove Confederate flags from government buildings. Congressman, nice to see you. Thanks for rolling through CNN.
Good to see you.
Before we get to all of that, just to what Sarah just reported, that the word from the White House is that after that extraordinary news conference, the president has no regrets. Where are you on all of this?
Well, what Donald Trump did was rip the sheets off and show the American people who he is and what he represents. It's shocking for a lot of people, but for those of us who grew up in New York, who have followed Donald Trump, we understand who he is as an individual. He has always used racial stereotypes to benefit himself professionally, politically, and personally, and now he's taken his despicable act, 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. It's time for him to stop acting like a 2-bit racial hustler and start acting like the President of the United States of America. A real president does not play political footsie with David Duke. A real president does not provide aid and comfort to neo-Nazis or to lift up this fraudulent ideology of white supremacy that Donald Trump seems to have a real problem distancing himself from.
Wrong words and harsh criticism for you. So what about Gary Cohn? Sarah was just reporting, who has his eye maybe even on bigger jobs within the administration, who is now officially enraged over this. Someone who I should also point out is Jewish.
That's correct.
Was standing behind him yesterday. Should he leave?
Well, it should trouble African Americans, Jews in particular, in terms of the affiliation with neo-Nazis, the KKK, and people who spew hatred, building upon an ideology that led to the Holocaust as well as the transatlantic slave trade. So everyone's got to make their own individual decisions. But I do think it's time for my colleagues, Republican colleagues in the House and the Senate, for instance, to start putting country ahead of party. This is not an issue of Democrats versus Republicans. It's an issue of right versus wrong. The president's on the wrong side of history, the wrong side of American values.
Congressman, it's easy for you as a Democrat to call the president out. But when you look at members of his own party, especially senior leadership, you know, our reporting is that Mitch McConnell, the Senate Majority Leader, privately is saying he's upset, but doesn't want to put it out there for fear of what that may look like because of their back and forth over health care. You know, John McCain, Senator McCain, is the only one who has called the president out by name. Do you think that these Republicans are afraid of something?
It appears that they are. Some seem to be afraid of the backlash that they may get from a substantial part of the Republican base that seems to still be willing to stand behind this president. But there are times that you've got to put the country ahead of your own political aspirations or even your political well-being. At this particular moment, my Republican colleagues have to step forth and do that, because this is a president who is eroding the credibility of the White House, eroding the credibility of the United States of America. In times like this, he should be bringing us together. Instead, he's tearing us apart.
Are you able to put job first? And by that, I mean, after this, is there anything you would, I mean, we're looking ahead at infrastructure possibly. Is there anything you'd be willing to work with the president on?
Not at this moment. He has got no credibility. I do think what we have to do.
Not at this moment.
Is Democrats and Republicans have to figure out how to govern together in the Congress. The Constitution does give us the ability to pass legislation without the president's signature to override him if necessary. It seems to me that we may be at that moment, presidential nullification, so to speak. If he decides to become reasonable all of a sudden, then maybe we can work with him. But there's nothing in his 71-year history that suggests he's going to be reasonable or responsible at the moment.
Let me read you something. This is from Dr. Ben and Candy Carson. He's just written this. I'm just going to read this for everyone here in total. Regarding all of the racial and political strife emanating from the events in Charlottesville last week, and let me relate a story. Several years ago, we bought a farm in rural Maryland. One of the neighbors immediately put up a Confederate flag. A friend of ours, who is African-American, 3-star general, was coming to visit and immediately turned around, concluding that he was in the wrong place. Interestingly, all the other neighbors immediately put up American flags, shaming the other neighbor who took down the Confederate flag. More recently, our home in Virginia, along with that of a neighbor, was vandalized by people who also wrote hateful rhetoric about President Trump. We were out of town, but other kind, embarrassed neighbors cleaned up most of the mess before we returned. In both instances, less than kind behavior was met by people taking the high road, We could all learn from these examples. Hatred and bigotry, unfortunately, still exist in our country, and we must all continue to fight it. But let's use the right tools. It ends, by the way, that neighbor who put up the Confederate flag subsequently became friendly. That is the likely outcome if we just learn to be neighborly and to get to know each other. What do you make of that?
Well, it's an unremarkable statement. I understand that Dr. Carson may feel like he finds himself in a difficult position because he's a member of the Trump cabinet, but he's not confronting the basic issues. Donald Trump essentially lifted up an argument advanced by neo-Nazis, the KKK and others, that the Confederacy is all about tradition and heritage. What exactly is the tradition and heritage that the Confederacy represents? Is it slavery, rape, kidnap, treason, lynching, Jim Crow, or all of the above? It's a phony argument. And the niceties that Ben Carson articulated are not going to get us past the legacy of slavery and hate that still exists in some quarters in this country.
Jim Jeffries, Congress. Thank you so much. Thank you. The worst firestorm President Trump has faced in his 200-plus days in office has now deepened. 2 of his CEO advisory groups created to promote job growth now gone, disbanding in the wake of his controversial remarks in the violence in Charlottesville, remarks that placed blame on racists and counter-protesters alike, with the president appearing to defend the neo-Nazis, the KKK, and the white supremacists. The heads of both Campbell's Soup and 3M were the latest to announce their exit from the president's advisory councils, the 7th and 8th executives to do so. Shortly after those announcements, the president confirmed this on Twitter, that he was disbanding both councils. With me now, CNN senior economics analyst Stephen Moore, who used to advise the Trump campaign, and CNN global economic analyst Rana Foroohar. She is also a global business columnist and associate editor for the Financial Times. Stephen, let me just begin with you. How big of a blow is this for the White House?
Well, I just have to respond to that previous interview because I found it unbelievably shocking, and I want to make sure I get this right because I don't want to misquote. A 2-bit racial hustler? A congressman called our president a 2-bit racial hustler? What kind of language is that to use by a congressman about a president? You can disagree with what he said, but I think those are pretty emotionally charged words. And when it comes to this economic council, you know, look, the CEOs have to do what's in the best interest of their companies and follow their own conscience. I had warned the White House that, you know, at the first time there was any controversy that these CEOs, who most of them were not for Trump in the first place, would probably abandon them. I predicted this kind of thing would happen, and so it's not surprising to me that you're seeing a lot of these folks leave this council. In the meetings that I was in when Trump would have these council meetings, by the way, they really truly were listening, tours where Donald Trump would sit around the table and listen to these CEOs and ask them, you know, what do you need from the federal government? How do you want it to work better? How can we in the federal government help you create jobs? That's what it was all about, and it's a shame that this this council now has to be. I believe, Brooke, it's being disbanded.
You know,
it is. Go ahead, Ron.
Brooke, I got to jump in here and say I spoke to many people this morning in the C-suite, and the reports that I got were that many of these meetings didn't go well at all, and there have been concerns even since the Paris Accord, frankly, amongst a lot of these CEOs, a lot of internal hand-wringing about whether they should be involved with the White House or not. They told me the meetings had not been going well. The proper officials from various federal departments weren't even in attendance. And I think that this really marks a tipping point. And I think this is a huge deal for the Trump administration and the White House. If you think about it, Brooke, for starters, the Strategic Committee had already decided to disband before President Trump tweeted that this morning following a conference call that was led by Steve Schwartzman, the CEO of Blackstone. When you think about the business community losing faith in the White House and also labor, you know, Richard Trumka, the head of the AFL-CIO, had already resigned. That's 2 core groups. That's the business community and working-class white men. And I think this is a real blow for the White House.
Well, but
Stephen,
wait a minute. You just said, hold on. I just want to respond to that.
Please do.
You said that a lot of these CEOs basically decided they didn't want to be part of this when Trump pulled out of the Paris.
There have been hand-wringing since the Paris
But let me make a point about this.
Go ahead, Stephen.
A lot of these CEOs basically said they didn't want to be a part of this because Trump wanted to drop out of the Paris Accord. But guess what? Donald Trump said he was going to do that during the campaign. So if they didn't want to be part of a council with somebody who was going to pull us out of the Paris Accord, then why did they join the council in the first place?
You
a
know
lot
what?
of them
they
did that because of the
reasons,
prestige.
Stephen. They joined it for 2 reasons: because they believed that you should join a
Right.
council when your president asked you to, but also later
Right.
on because they wanted to keep some adults in the around important policy conversations like tax reform,
But my point is, when he did, he said what he was going to do. When he said he was going to do what he was going to do, then why did they? Oh, I'm so outraged by this. They knew his positions when they took these positions. Now look,
folks have been trying to influence the president and the White House around things like the skills agenda, around
Right.
infrastructure. Now, I'm not saying that many of them possibly shouldn't have taken a stand and stood down earlier, but I think let's not fool ourselves. The entire business community has been worried about the Trump agenda for some time, and the disaster that is his handling of Charlottesville is just the apex of that.
okay, but let me make a point. What is business really, mostly concerned about? What are CEOs concerned about? About a healthy economy. And my goodness, I mean, has any president in the first 6 months delivered a healthier economy
Stephen,
than Donald
please,
Trump? I mean, you're seeing a boom in jobs. You're seeing a pickup in optimism. You're seeing a pickup in employment. I made this point yesterday on CNN. It's worth repeating that for all the talk about how Donald Trump has an anti-black agenda, this is a president who's created black jobs just in the first 6 months in office at twice the pace that Barack Obama did.
I'm sorry, God bless you. Or we fact check the fact that Donald Trump does not deserve credit for anything good that has happened in the American economy in the last
Yeah, he doesn't get any credit for this. Right, exactly. How should he get credit? He was there, but I mean, the stock market didn't go through the roof the day after. Oh no, actually, it did go through the roof the day after the election.
Share buybacks because they can do
right.
them
It's
alone.
Barack Obama's economy, right?
Janet, I'm just sitting here and listening to the two of you go back and forth. Clearly very different views.
But look, Brooke, this is my point, though. I mean, people, this absurd argument that Trump doesn't deserve the credit for the.
No, I don't think that's the conversation. Honestly, let's leave that. We've had that conversation.
That people can't even give credit to Trump for the things that's gone right. So there's this. A lot of this is just against Trump's agenda, no matter what he does.
Okay, let's move past that. Here's my question for you, Stephen. The president now is in this position where he's the one, ending these councils, but that's not entirely factual. He had no choice. He had no choice, so why spin it that way?
Well, look, I don't remember exactly how many people were on the. I mean, this was a pretty big council. I mean, he has 4 or 5 of these business councils. When people start dropping off the council, it's probably a pretty good idea to fold it up. But look, he has a number. I think there are 6 or 7 of these business industry councils that he's put together to seek advice from the business leaders of the country. And by the way, for the people who are dropping out,
Stephen, hang on, he called them grandstanders in that tweet yesterday, and essentially said he could just replace them. But he's choosing not to replace them. He's just closing down the councils.
I hope he does replace them, because I think it is important for Donald Trump to get good advice.
I'll be curious. Wants to serve. I think the business community has lost faith in this president. He hasn't accomplished any of his agenda, and he hasn't shown the kind of leadership that a president should. And that's what I'm hearing from all the CEOs that I talk to.
Well, but it's ridiculous to say he hasn't accomplished any of his agenda. He's only been in office for 6 months. We've already seen the U.S. GDP go from 1.5% and declining under Obama to 2.6% and rising under Trump.
Nothing to do with him, Stephen, and you know that's true.
Right. It doesn't have anything to do with his policies. Right.
Okay. Stephen and Rana. Whew, it's just Wednesday. It's just Wednesday. Thank you. Both of you. Coming up next. He may have shocked the nation with his sudden about-face on the Nazis and white supremacists who invaded Charlottesville, Virginia. But many who have actually followed Donald Trump long before he became president say they're not surprised. In fact, his critics claim his stance on racial issues is quite well known, from his birther attacks on President Obama to refusing to accept the innocence of the so-called Central Park Five.
The state of Hawaii says this is official. He was born in Hawaii on this date. Here it is. Why do you deny that?
A lot of people do not think it was an authentic certificate.
How can you say that
you won't report it, Wolf, but many people do not think it was authentic.
Donald, you're beginning to sound a little ridiculous. I have to tell you.
You are, Wolf.
Do you accept that President Obama was born in the United States, is not Muslim?
I really don't know. I mean, I don't know. I don't.
Wolf, but many people do not think it was authentic.
Donald, you're beginning to sound a little ridiculous. I have to tell
I think you are, Wolf.
Do you accept that President Obama was born in the United States,
No,
is
I
not
don't know.
Muslim?
I really don't know. I mean,
You don't know.
I don't know. I don't know why he wouldn't release his records. But, you know, honestly, I don't want to get into it. The problem we have is we don't have any protection for the policeman. The problem with our society is that the victim has absolutely no rights and the criminal has unbelievable rights. Unbelievable rights. And I say it has to stop. That's why I took the ad. And I have to tell you, that ad, I've never done anything that's been so positively received. Of course I hate these people. And let's all hate these people, because maybe hate is what we need if we're going to get something done.
Well, the Central Park Five was a group of teenagers, black and Latino, who were wrongly convicted of a brutal 1989 beating and rape of a Central Park jogger. The crime inflamed the city and really the country, and it also prompted Trump to take out an ad in 4 newspapers demanding the state of New York reinstate the death penalty. The real rapist confessed 2002. To date, President Trump has never apologized for his comments about the case, nor publicly accepted the fact that all 5 men did not commit the crime. So with me now, 2 members of the Central Park Five, Yusuf Salaam, who was 15 at the time of his arrest, and Raymond Santana, who was all of 14. Gentlemen, thank you so much for being with me.
Thank you for having us.
Yusuf, just starting with you, going back, you once called Trump a fire starter and said he lit the match for all the backlash that you faced. When you watched the president standing in Trump Tower talking about Charlottesville and the groups on both sides, how did you feel?
I think it's despicable and deplorable for him to, at this point in the game, to spend April 19th. There was a rush to judgment, and it was a stoking of the fire in a similar way. Him saying that this group and this group were both equally wrong caused the death of a young woman. Horrible and horrific.
So you're saying if there was a rush to judgment in the case judging you back then, why wasn't there a rush to judgment over the weekend in Charlottesville?
Well, what I'm saying is that the idiocracy of saying that you want to be able to judge the facts when we see that this is clearly American terrorism that's going on.
Right.
You got folks running around chanting and chanting and chanting, and
right.
You got folks running around chanting and chanting and chanting, and I mean we've all seen it. We've all seen what was going on.
It's evil. On its face, it's evil.
It's absolute evil. And I think that for this to be the ideal of make America great again, this is making America hate again.
Raymond, same question to you. And just listening to the president yesterday, how he's essentially giving these protesters, the benefit of the doubt, something I imagine you would say he never gave you.
Yeah, he never gave us the benefit of the doubt. And to sit there and say, like, you have to look at both sides was totally wrong. At the end of the day, these people came and they were protesting a statue that represented hate. It represented bigotry. It represented keeping us, people of color, oppressed. It represented making us slaves again. And so that was the root of it. And he never once touched on the root. Why these people were here to represent, to protest against this statue in the first place.
You have people
the slaves again. And so that was the root of it. And he never once touched on the root. Why these people were here to represent, to protest against this statue in the first place.
You have people, let me come back to the statues, because that is a whole other piece of this conversation. But to both of you, Yusuf, you have all these people now on social media, on TV, asking this question, why are we surprised, right? That Trump has this history of insensitivity when it comes to race. You've been arguing this for decades.
Well, Donald Trump comes on the heel of President Barack Obama. And President Barack Obama gave us a tremendous sense of a hope that we needed as a nation, this ideal that we can get past a lot of the things that we're seeing that are coming out today. And I think the surprise that a lot of people are experiencing that we haven't experienced is a surprise that hopefully this person who has become the president is going to maybe grow into his presidency, is going to maybe change with the time. But I think that when you're talking about a person who is, for all intents and purposes, probably my grandfather's age, he's already solidified in the type of person that he is. He's never changed. He's never shown us anything other than what he's showing us now. We actually need to be able to say no. We always knew it. We shouldn't have never gone down the road of making this person the president of these United States, because as we see, everything that's happening is.
But he is the president. I mean, I just have to point out the fact is he's the
not
45th
my president.
He's the 45th president of this country.
He's 45th. He's 45th.
He's not my president. I ain't vote for him. He's not my president.
You know, I mean, but there should be no surprises. Basically, what I'm saying. If you look at the track record, if you look at everything, you know, I mean, but there should be no surprises. Basically, what I'm saying. If you look at the track record, if you look at everything that he's done, the people, I think, were enamored by the fact that he got a nice, you know, loan from his dad and was able to rise up the ladder of success. But that really was not a real truth telling in terms of how that even happened as well, you know.
We could. There are documentaries. There are all kinds of lanes we could go down.
Absolutely.
But on right now, Raymond, I mean, if you're saying he's not your president, and God forbid something like Charlottesville happens again, I mean, these neo-Nazis are threatening to come back.
Yes.
And if you are not looking to the president to lead, who are you looking to?
Then we're looking at Democrats, we're looking at Republicans, we're looking at other public figures, those who can step in and calm the situation down, those who have stepped up and they denounce, you know, white supremacy. And this is what they're supposed to do. These are also our leaders, you know, in the political field. They're supposed to take that step forward if the president can't do it. This is why they're there.
And these monuments, you know, we've seen these monuments and flags coming down, and that's become this whole conversation. But at the end of the day, and I realize it symbolizes a tremendous amount for a huge percentage of this country, but at the same time, how much does that really fix the root issue?
Well, it's part of the root issue because nobody has.
How much does that really fix the root issue?
Well, it's part of the root issue because nobody has sat down and said, okay, if George Washington has owned slaves, Jackson has owned slaves, you know, do they deserve these statues also? It's like everybody has forgotten what, you know, people of color have been fighting for. They've been fighting for an equal opportunity, an equal chance to be successful. And those statues represent oppression at the end of the day. Even though they're considered our forefathers, but they still represent oppression. They represent how this country was built on the back of our ancestors. And it's wrong.
Last question, just quickly, Yusuf, do you have hope?
I have tremendous hope in us. I think that when the most poignant statement I've heard in the last few years was from Michelle Obama. And she said, when they go low, we go high. And I think it's us. I think ultimately it's us. It's up to us to make sure that we be the change that we seek, as Gandhi said. I think that when we move in that manner, and we're talking about moving forward and moving into a progressive state, then there's no room for hate in the future that we see and we seek as a people for ourselves. And that's the total. When I look at we the people, I know that that statement back then wasn't written from the perspective of us as we are. So I think ultimately it's us. It's up to us to make sure that we be the change that we seek, as Gandhi said. I think that when we move in that manner, and we're talking about moving forward and moving into a progressive state, then there's no room for hate in the future that we see and we seek as a people for ourselves. And that's the total. When I look at we the people, I know that that statement back then wasn't written from the perspective of us as we are today. But when I look at it today, we are the people. We are that melting pot of America, and we are here. And there's nothing that can be done about it except for us to move forward and progress together. Right.
Yusuf and Raymond, thank you guys so much.
Thank you.
Now, for more on just what all of this means for our country, Errol Lewis is with us, CNN political commentator, a political anchor at Spectrum News, CNN political commentator S.E. Cupp, and host of HLN's S.E. Cupp Unfiltered, which debuts Monday. Cultural critic and writer Michaela Angela Davis, she is back. Danny Zucker, one of the executive producers of the sitcom Modern Family, who is engaged in numerous Twitter spats with Donald Trump. So welcome to all of you. And Errol, let me just turn to you